So thank you to the previous two speakers, and thank you for the audience. Tell us your questions. I don't know that we have someone running around with a mic. I might task someone. Garrett? No? No? Someone? Oh, Tara, there we go. If the audience has questions, please
Yes,
come and get a mic, and someone should run around. But go ahead, Carolina, lead us. Oh, and we would like the screen on, please.
Yeah. We would like to have a speakers, remote speakers on while.
Thank you.
So yes, please ask questions, but for now I would like maybe first ask Shweta, could you tell us a little bit more about biosecurity in the context of effective altruism and why they're choosing like to spark more research and conversation around this area, why it is important?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that question. I think the community of effective altruism has had many cause areas that they are working on, and working towards mitigating global catastrophic biorisks, which is GCBRs, is one of their cause areas. And that is because there has been a lot of literature work which shows how increasingly likely it is for us to end up in a high consequence biological situation, which is likely to cause massive disruption in economies, governments, international security, and so on and so forth. And really, the COVID-19 pandemic was not even near the definition of GCBR. So given we have faced COVID, we now realize that even with something that is not GCBR level, we have so many vulnerabilities in our systems that actually need more attention for us to be able to actually be ready for a GCBR level event. And the likelihood of a global catastrophic biorisk coming from a natural source is increasingly less than a GCBR level actually coming from an engineered pandemic, which means malicious actors actually intending to cause harm at a global scale. So that is one of the reasons GCBR is a focus of effective altruism, because it affects the long-term future of humanity and potentially poses existential threat.
Thank you, Shweta. So we have like few ways to approach it, I suppose. One is the policy making, and one is like technological advancements. Do you imagine like how olfaction can be, and machine olfaction, and this is like the question to all of our guests, can help to mitigate those risks? And what kind of threats you imagine as a potential threats coming out from this area? And we had like an interesting offline conversation before, so I wanted to ask this question here online now too.
Can I jump in?
Jump in.
First of all, thank you very much. I'm happy that I'm not the only one who wears a tie. I see someone there. Thank you. What I'd like to say, isn't it, maybe most of you don't remember, but the year 2000 came and left, and I think we had the Y2K catastrophe. The world was collapsing because everything was going to shut down. Maybe you younger people don't remember this, but Andreas and I remember it. The world was coming to an end because of what? Things were going to be, I guess people were going to shut the power plants. Everything was going to come to an end. For me, when it comes to olfaction as a lawyer, the way I kind of look at things is I look at data. And the way I look at it is that IBM came up with a statistic and said that we are generating 25, number 25, and then add another 18 zeros after it, of bytes of data every day. And this is just over the last 2 years, we have generated apparently 90% of all the data that has been created so far over the last 2 years. And as a lawyer, I don't understand the greatness of all the data being generated, but we haven't even begun to bring in olfactory data. How many more zeros are we going to add
Osmo data.
to
great
that number now? And then, as a lawyer, people tell me, well, hold it. Most of the data is unstructured. And when I first heard that word, I said, what is it unstructured? What do you mean unstructured? And the way I understand it, and maybe the scientist can kind of help me, is that most of the going into a big library with a lot of books, millions of books, but there's no way to figure out where the books are located. So we are generating data at a great amount per day. Most of it is unstructured, so good luck finding it. And now we have the olfactory people coming in and saying we're going to generate an incredible amount of data, which is very unique and very powerful. So to me, this is a big question. And data, I think, is the key. Of course, the technology is important, and how we generate innovation and how we commercialize ideas is also very important, but where and how we capture and protect data is also very important.
And I want to jump in on this, Dimitri. Thank you for saying this, because I could not agree more. My question about the data is, let's take a subset of biodata, as these people were talking about, which we call, and by the way, this term was coined by Karolina Sulic here. She coined the term osmodata, a subset of biodata that is called osmodata, and osmodata refers to the kind of information that is leaking out of your body as part of your body odor and other emissions. And what can we do with this? Now, a very key question is, who owns these data? If your body generated the odorants,
It's my smell, Andreas.
if it's your smell,
It's my
but I
smell.
can smell it, you're generating the signal, or you're generating the odorants, I am generating the data in my own head, right? So the question becomes, who owns this data? Secondly, who gets to use it, annotate it, mine it, rent it, sell it, aggregate it? And where is this data, where is the limit, the boundaries of how far away, literally how far away from me can you be before your data and my data merge? Right? If you take a picture of someone, it's quite clear where somebody's body ends and somebody else's body begins, unless they're very close together. And we have a special name for those kind of pictures. Right? So here we have a situation where my body odor now is leaking all over this place, so is his, so is everybody's. It all gets mixed together. And if I have a phone or another device that analyzes my own data and tells me, oh, I know who you are, okay, and I can trust it and everything, okay, great. But now I can point my phone to Dimitri and know everything about his health. Is that fair? Is that reasonable? Is that completely crazy and insane? I'm of the opinion that we can start by thinking of this as image data. Who owns the pictures in your phone? Not the phone company, not Facebook, even though they used to, or maybe they still do, depending on what you signed for your terms and agreements. Fundamentally, you own these pictures, right? If somebody breaks into your phone, steals those pictures, and uses them to advertise some product, let's say, using your baby, for instance, to sell diapers in some other country, which has happened, you have a recourse in the law. And to say, oh, this is not your picture. I took this picture. I did not give you permission to use it. Take it down or give me money. That does not exist with Osmo data. I think that the key to getting into a universe where Osmo data is available and useful is to figure out the business models around it. And it revolves around the lawyers figuring out who is the owner, and the engineers here figuring out technologies that will bake in this ownership and this privacy right in the technology. There's blockchain, there's other things now that can be used to make sure at least that the ownership of your own data rests with you. If you agree that this is yours. There's another opinion out there that says no. Once you leave it behind, once you emit it out of your body, it's no longer yours. Once I emit sounds out of my mouth, unless I'm in a protected environment, it's in the public domain. Now I've disclosed it, I no longer own those sounds. So which side of this divide are you going to be on? I'm very firmly on the side that my body generates some data, generates some information. I should be the owner of that. And I want to pass it on to the lawyers to tell us about the ownership, but also to the engineer here to tell us what kind of technologies can you think of that would bake in the laws that we want to apply here so that it's almost impossible to break the law because the technology doesn't allow it, if that's even possible.
So I think that actually raises a really interesting question. And I realize that you're kind of catalyzing me to ask another question in some ways, in that when you think about the benefits of using different sampling methods for diagnostic purposes, most of what we've been taught our entire life has been take somebody, sample their blood, sample their urine, inspect it, learn about it, and from there you can make diagnostic criteria. What we offer with olfaction is this exceptional form factor associated, right, with sampling someone. But what it lacks sort of is this ground truth that biological data that is sampled from your blood, for example, provides to you. So one thing that comes to mind is anyone who samples blood or urine, they have access to your DNA. They have this ground truth that says this individual emitted this diagnostic criteria, this data belongs to them. What's unique, though, about Osmo data in this case is that we don't have that ground truth. We have a scent, and various animals have been shown to be able to identify an individual based on their scent, humans included. And so I wonder, how do we draw an effective line here? And how do we say this data as interpreted now is an identifier, and in the future for other data streams, how do we then say, look, we've delineated what is considered good or anonymous data, or how do we say this is data that needs to be identified? And this, of course, interrogates all the HIPAA questions associated as well. So well, sure, yeah. Well, I'm thinking it goes two ways, right? Because I'm thinking, how do we bake that into the science itself? How do we start interpreting identifying data versus diagnostic data, right? And create that interplay there. And then, of course, how do we then regulate that? Because it will be quite distinct from existing biological mechanisms.
I will let Demetrios answer this question.
Okay, it's on you.
Always getting the difficult
Yes,
questions.
Yes.
Well, it's a very valid point. I look at data, olfactory data, in the medical and the non-medical context. And let's take the medical context where you go to a doctor and the doctor now has the artificial nose and kind of smells you. You already voluntarily have given up permission for that data to be distributed to your doctor, who puts it in some kind of a electronic file. It's there, whatever. Then if you want to get it, you can never delete that medical file. I mean, that's what the law is. You can never delete it. The doctor has possession of that data, and if you want it, you got to pay the doctor to send you your data. That's the system we have today. In the non-medical field, an insurance company can come over and say, well, you want to get a life insurance policy here? But let me smell you and let me see what the data shows as a possibility of you surviving the next 20 years so I can make money off you. And if the data that comes out of your body, the smell, indicates that there's a risk, that something horrible may happen to you, I hereby decline that application. You're out. Health insurance also comes into play. Can you now be rejected on a healthcare application because you've got a predisposition to some kind of a disease? And these are all questions that have not been answered. The problem I have is that as a society, the way we've handled things is backwards. We have had companies like Facebook, Google, you do a Google search now and it knows pretty much everything about you. So we've let these companies innovate, grow, and do all these things, collecting all the data, and then years later, we began to talk about privacy, and we began to talk about, well, hold it, who is the owner of that kind of a data? And then we've got all these regulations and laws that are coming out that's saying you click here, if you click here, you accept all of these terms and conditions, and they're hundreds of pages, nobody understands them, nobody reads them. So we have created an elaborate scheme of data protection that comes after they obtain the data. So I think we have to be proactive. I think we have to start the discussion from the moment that the technology is being developed, not later. And we have to set the parameters. And I think Andreas are in agreement on this point that it is not an opt-out setup that we need to kind of create. I think we have to create an opt-in scenario where olfactory data is shared only if we specifically allow that data to be created. So now, I think about it in a joking kind of a way. Let's say you go on a date and you've got your smartphone with olfactory sensing devices or whatever, and you look at the other person and you smell the other person, and the question is, do you really want to be here with me? Do you like me? And the smell that comes back is no. Who has that data? You know, who owns that particular data on your phone that is captured by you, but it's the smell of the other person? And now what about the dating services that we have? I mean, you've got 150 million questions that they ask you, I suppose, and they kind of try to figure out with an algorithm that, okay, you're compatible with that person. I want the smell to be part of that, evaluation process. So I think when it comes to data, olfactory data, we need to really be proactive in securing that data, making it part of the technology aspects of it as we develop the technology, and not letting the big, companies that are developing, some of the companies that are sponsoring us here. But, the whole idea behind it is that we got to talk about the data and the individuality, the protection of it as the emerging technologies come into play.
Great point, Dimitrios. So maybe I will pass it to Wojtek, who is like a...
I want Mia to say her words too. But go ahead.
Mia, I have a question for Mia regarding that too. Who will... Wojtek, would you like to jump in here and share your thoughts?
Thank you for the voice. It comes for me one analogy from the privacy protection. Well, there is definition of the personal data. It's the information or personal information related to the data subject. Is the information that it will allow you to identify particular person. It may be the same case for the olfaction data that from the, let's say, depending on the distance from the source, there will be some kind of limit when after the passing that limit, the VOCs will be collected, will not allow to identify particular person. So that may be a kind of definition of the when under what range we owns our emitted organic compounds data. That's the one proposal to how to approach this particular case about ownership. In regards to the different topics just discussed about how to implement the let's say all the regulations about the ownership and how the best practices to process the data. I'm also agree on this approach. We should take care about this from scratch when all the technology related to this particular direction is still, let's say, in a baby time, and we can make it from the beginning design as a secure and privacy by default. That's the
Thanks, Wojtek.
good option.
Did I interrupt you? Is it like okay?
Thank you.
That's a great
Can
insight.
I jump in again?
No. Can you hold your thought, because I have like a question to Mia, and data in terms of weaponization of data. So what's your take on that? How it's looking now, and like.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for the question. My comment here is basically that it's this is not just a future concern; it's a present one. And Cathy O'Neil actually talks about this a lot in her book, Weapons of Mass Destruction. And I think it is time to, and it's long past time to think of biological weapons as weapons of mass destruction. And I loved in Shrestha's presentation, she had on her final slide the domestic, regional, and global regulation of biological weapons. And actually it was, so in the 1925 Geneva Geneva Protocol, the use of biological weapons was banned. And then in the Biological Weapons Convention, the procurement and stockpiling of these weapons was banned. But in order to fully, when talking about regulating these weapons and things to do moving forward and at present, I think coming up with comprehensive and creative verification protocols in order to ensure compliance with the Biological Weapons Convention, that's something that needs to be happening at present.
Great, great answer. Maybe you had a comment, like, please.
I wanted to
Wojtek.
add to something that he's from where? Poland?
Yes.
Okay. When I first began to think about olfactory data, I was thinking about distances and how far around our human body does the privacy come in, and where does the public domain start? But I think that approach may be a little wrong, and I'll tell you why. Because I think the way that Andreas now phrases it is that sometimes olfactory data mixes. It may include my data, his data, as we are all sitting here. It may not be a clean-cut data. I think the standard we should probably think about olfactory data is the moment it begins to sort of be in a position of being identified with an individual. It doesn't matter the distance. It could be 3 meters, 5 meters. But if we have the ability to identify the individual and kind of make the connection between the olfactory data and the individual, that is private. I think that's the probably standard.
I like where you're going with it. This is the first time I hear this idea.
Right.
My first instinct was that, oh, interesting. And then I thought, the technology will get better and better, and you'll be able to identify more and more with more and more accuracy as your understanding of the global.
Okay, I move back to my early point, distance.
But it's a good thing to start thinking about. Also, what I note here is that we're all talking about biological weapons, Geneva Conventions, all these other things that have been established for protection of humans and human privacy now with the HIPAA and all that. But these are all sort of, again, like you said, after the fact. I would like to now make the technology, because we still have a moment here. For instance, Aromics, who are here represented in our great sponsors, and thank you so much for that. They, will take data and then we'll generate olfactory data, and nobody's bothering them because indeed they're not personal. Or are people bothering you already?
I can make a comment.
Okay, maybe you should. In fact, maybe we should throw it to Ilya here, who gave the wonderful lecture earlier. Do people already come and bother you with this, or are you already concerned? Because yours is quite sort of sterile in the sense that you're not looking at people's private stuff. But I would love to hear Aromics's.
Hold it. You probably have a disclaimer form that people sign before they, no?
Well,
or you should.
We right now we don't work with individual people, right? So we work with companies and products, but a very real world scenario that we do face with a lot of our customers is, basically we'll have one big company send us samples for us to test. We do the testing, we send them the data, but then obviously, as I'm sure all of you know, like the way that AI and machine learning works is that, the more data we have, the better the algorithms are. But then you can imagine we have the competitor of that original company who comes to us and wants us to test their product. And then we're like, well, like they want to know, well, how did my competitor's samples do? Where are they? And so it really gets into a very interesting framework that I mean, we kind of have to make, right now we just kind of make calls sort of arbitrarily, but at what point is, I think, and this is, I think, where this is relevant is, I'm sure all of the things that we're talking about now, they're going to have a huge machine learning and AI component. And by definition, those are things that are going to need training data. So I think the interesting thing is going to be like, is also, not just sharing data and like, is it okay for me to see somebody's olfactory data, but is it okay for us to use somebody's olfactory data in as training inputs for AI? So I think that gets even kind of murkier.
A lot of questions to answer. So we are running out of time, but I have like one maybe more general question to all of you. So as we identified, we can approach biosecurity from this like two different angles. But I was wondering, we've been also speaking a lot about non-invasive diagnostics for certain diseases. And I wonder if there is like a possibility of creating some kind of extremely versatile pathogen sensing device that could like help us mitigate biorisks, like pandemic biorisks. And what are the main obstacles, like technological obstacles that we are facing? This is a question.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and it's a pretty exciting one as well. I think on the path to this device, this tricorder, like was shown earlier, there are a number of challenges. On one side, we have the political challenge, and I think Dimitri and Mia touched on that briefly as well. What is appropriate to sample? What is inappropriate? But on the other hand, how can we kind of encourage people to think a little less directly about biological sampling and a little more indirectly? And I return to form factor here. And there's two primary components of form factor that I think will be extremely helpful in this context of the tricorder. The first is, as we're talking about, olfaction, and the other one is like imaging or video. And I think if we would, kind of beat both of those paths independently, we'll eventually get to a point where we have this concept of, let's sort of like say, ubiquitous sensing, where today we think about diagnostics in the context of a doctor's office. Companies like Owlstone Medical, potentially Aromics, are looking at very medical grade techniques that will be confined to the diagnostic laboratory. But there will be a lot of work to get from there to the point where everyone has one of these devices in their house, not the least of which is miniaturization of these techniques. And along the way, what we'll find is many of these techniques will fall out of favor because they just can't be miniaturized. And some, by contrast, are designed from the get-go to be miniaturized. And so something that comes to mind is today the gold standard in gas sensing or olfactory detection is this technique known as gas chromatography and mass spectrometry. And most of the papers you might see in the literature often use things like GCMS, although there are many other techniques like it. And these are lab-grade techniques that don't really stand a chance of ever being miniaturized, not without some exceptional innovation, where other techniques like field asymmetric ion mobility spectrometry, technique being pursued by Owlstone, actually I think can stand a chance of being miniaturized and becoming highly specific. So when we think sort of orthogonally about techniques that can be developed in the field, I think one of the most important things to focus on is this technique ever going to be used in the context of a ubiquitous sensing, or are we sort of like hacking, using things that exist that might work today sort of, but that don't really stand a chance of ever becoming miniaturized? And I hope that for the nosemakers out there, we really, really focus on how do we make things as small, as affordable, as easy to use as possible.
Can I jump in again? So what happens when we travel to space? I mean, all these things that we're talking about now, we are in empty space. We're in spacesuits, and I kind of love spacesuits, but there's no smell. No?
We do have a space person talking later today.
Okay.
Chris will talk to us about the smells of space. In fact, it is the thing, even though it's vacuum. There's both sound and smell in space. It just doesn't go the same way that you think it does. And it's a big mystery why spacesuits and other equipment that has been exposed to the vacuum of space in the open bay, when they open the bay doors on the space shuttle, when they close the bay doors and repressurize, why does everything smell of burnt meat? That is what they report, the astronauts. I've met 3 of them. I've asked them personally. They say it smells like you put a baseball glove on fire, is what they said to me, or a burnt pork chop. It's a great big mystery. There's many theories about space's smell. People think, oh, maybe it's ionizing radiation hitting the leather in the spacesuits and getting it to ionize and making an analog to burnt meat. But it's pretty much a mystery why that happens. We're not entirely certain why. It's not that the space itself has the scent, although that might also be true. It is that the objects that are exposed to high vacuum then end up smelling a certain way that is unique. Also, you should know this, there's spectroscopic techniques that will tell you that there's interstellar clouds that are full of amino acids or full of chemicals that have a very distinct smell. And so we can see this also in the atmosphere of planets. You can do spectroscopy and say, oh, this planet smells like rotten eggs. And you can do this quite well because you can detect the H2S compound and things like that. So the smell of space is an interesting thing. I think, do we want to thank this panel and move on to the...
Yes.
Nope, we have one
Thank you.
question before we leave
Oh,
today.
okay.
1 second.
A question
Hi.
from the audience? Yeah.
Yeah, hi, I'm Chris Hansen with Aromics. Andreas, just as an aside, NASA JPL asked us to recreate the smell of Mars for a Marsscape that they were making down at Caltech, and we said, yeah, we could do that, but it's going to kill everybody. And then they explained, no, we want it to smell like Mars, but not be deadly. So,
Oh, interesting. I love it.
So where did you get the samples?
well, we didn't pursue it.
Ah,
But I just wanted to clarify about the Aromics approach. We are not using humans to smell things. We clone the olfactory or taste receptors into a sensing system in our lab, and we get the genes from the Human Genome Project, and we construct the receptors in-house. So there really isn't a privacy issue because who knows where that gene
Right. I think
information came from.
we're very familiar with the Aromics approach. You guys are fantastic. We love what you do. I think the question was not so much about the people's genes, but the people's sense. Now, currently you're using products, but one day somebody will, I don't know, donate some urine to you that has been collected from people with and without prostate cancer or something like this. And then you start being able to diagnose it. The question becomes, where does privacy land, et cetera? I think Aromics will have an interesting ride with all this once you get into closer to the humans.
Yeah, that is interesting. We did do malaria and prostate cancer, and we used urine samples. And
I
Thank
think you
you.
did COVID too, no? You did COVID also, right?
we just didn't have the facilities.
That's
to
right,
do
yeah.
it.
So thank you for unlocking the space dimension. And just summing up, I wanted this conversation to just simmer or linger somewhere. I think biosecurity approach from the policy side, and policy is extremely challenging, and technological side is something that we should focus on. And there is another convergence of the dimension, because olfaction and biosecurity are yet not very well funded. There are still a lot of opportunities in these two areas that should be yes, that should be taken opportunity of. So thank you, Shrestha, so much, and thank you,
Thank you so much.
Wojtek. Thanks all the panelists here, Mia, Nico, Andreas, and Dimitrios, and let's keep on hoping to biosecure the world.
Okay, so we have a 5-minute break.
Bye.
Please be back by 2:38 if you need a bio break. And we're going to be setting up for the next presentation, which is by an artist.